Okay, I'd like to start the advisory design panel meeting from Thursday, September 26. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Squamish Nation traditional territory. Item 2, adoption of agenda. Can I ask for a motion to adopt the agenda? Second. Okay. Item number 3, minutes. Do I have any? Do you want comments about the minutes, or anyone got anything to add to the minutes? No. Can I ask for a motion to adopt the minutes? Seconded. Okay. Business arising. There's an item here: scheduling of future meetings.
Yes. So we have. There's 2 items that I'd like to discuss. One is a second meeting in October, and whether the members who are here, I understand that not everybody's here, but those who are here, whether you would be willing to entertain a second meeting on the 31st of October.
Is there 2 projects on that day?
There's one project, but it's Scott Crescent, and it's fairly large, so I think it would probably take up most of the time.
Only if we come in costume.
I'm not coming in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, you do dress up, don't you?
I'll
Yes,
dress up
we
as
did.
an architect, so it's wear black.
Yeah.
Which I do every day.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
So that would work for me
Okay.
at the moment.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I actually have a whole force on design panel.
Yeah, I think there was one sent out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine. I think that was sent out.
Perfect.
So the 17th and the 31st.
Yeah. Tannis, what do you?
I can probably do the 31st, but not the 17th.
Okay.
Are there 2 items on the 17th or?
I believe so.
Okay.
Okay, and the second item is moving the December meeting. So I think right now it's later in December. I don't recall exactly what day, but it's getting close to the holiday season, 21st. And so we're wondering if the panel wanted to move the meeting to like December 12th.
In the 19th right now.
Is it?
Yeah. At least it is in my calendar.
Yeah. That would be better.
Yeah.
12th would be better.
It doesn't matter for staff, but just, we don't want to get too close to the holidays and then lose, and not be able to make the meeting.
Yeah, 12th is fine.
Yeah, okay, perfect. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so thanks everybody for being here to talk about the zoning bylaw. I'm just going to start by saying I've really only got an hour. I have to leave at 3, so not a ton of time. We're going to blast through. I actually have a little bit of presentation, but I'm actually going to go through really quick. Zoning bylaw update's underway right now. Our last zoning bylaw was adopted in 2011 after an OCP was produced at that time. It was a 2-year process. We've done a bunch of updates to it over time, property-specific zoning bylaw amendments that you deal with regularly, and district-initiated housekeeping and high-priority changes. Over time, we've racked up a list of all the things that we see as problems, things that need to get addressed, and so we want to do that at this point. And you've got that list actually in your agenda, items that we've, and it's a fairly not super detailed description of those, but that's one of the things we want to tackle. And then also there are some strategic things that we want to tackle. So this update has really 4 major components to it: aligning the zoning with the official community plan that was recently adopted, increasing flexibility in the zoning bylaw, improving functionality, and addressing gaps in the bylaw. And yes, there's a bit of a contradiction between trying to increase flexibility and then close gaps, but that's obviously specific to different topic areas. So the topic 1, aligning zoning with the OCP, this is just kind of a high level. Some of the things we want to tackle are industrial use clarification, working on their business park, clarifying the zoning there, trying to achieve some of the goals in the OCP for the business park. We want to develop marine zoning, a little bit of facilitating affordable housing. There's some sub-area plan implementation, primarily up in the university, but also in the Wilson Crescent, where a micro sub-area plan is created. And we want to align our land use designations with zoning. There are some places where our zoning doesn't match up, and we want to align with proactively with the OCP's vision. We want to increase flexibility. Some of our regulations are overly restrictive and are frustrating for members of the public and developers and don't really provide much benefit. So that includes expanding some permitted uses and relaxing some regulations. We also want to improve functionality. There's some issues with clarity in our zoning bylaw, heaven forbid, hard to imagine, but actually, yeah, some of those regulations are a bit hard to understand or use. And also they don't always align well with other documents, other regulatory structures like provincial regs. So we want to align with other regulations, clarify definitions, regulations, and calculations. And then we want to address some gaps in the bylaw. We've got some negative community outcomes that occur when we have regulations that aren't addressing issues that we want to address. That can compromise planning intentions, and so that includes adding some missing regulations, addressing some regulatory weaknesses, in some areas zoning for existing uses that are appropriate, but we have like, there's a single family that's zoned park, doesn't make sense, we got to fix that. And then there's a bit of a broader question around updating parking regulations. So from you guys, what I'm looking for is we've kind of pulled out, so in the report that you received, there was an initial list of items that were kind of selected for discussion with ADP, and then it also included the entire package. We're not going to dive into the entire package, but I'm open to any commentary or questions or suggestions you have outside of this meeting. But since we have a limited amount of time, I just want to blast through the ones that were in that for ADP consideration. So I'm just going to go through them. Do a little explanation, might need to answer some questions on each one, and then look to see if people have comments. If you don't have any comments or concerns or thoughts on it, don't worry about it, but if you do, I'd love to hear it. So the first one is a bit of a broader one. This is from the OCP, updating business park zoning. This is actually, we had a push during the OCP to have policy around this, and so we're contemplating it now. And just to be clear, all of these items that I've got listed in that zoning bylaw update, they have not all been thoroughly considered to the point where we've got a regulatory structure for them. They're conceptual. There are definitely some that are not going to get completed out as part of this process, but we want to go through them and say, okay, is this worth doing? Yes or no? Get rid of the ones that we don't, and then develop the regulations for the ones that we do. So this one is consider more intensive uses of land in the business park through increased floor area ratios and building heights, while balancing the impacts to economic viability of light industrial activities. Anybody have any comments, thoughts about this one?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Nope.
No?
Carlos?
Yeah, I would say there's a few sites that I've had my eye on down the city. One of them is like the Ironworks
Yeah.
building. I'm not sure what they do with their zoning and how broad it is, but I know it was a pretty resounding success as far as the project goes. And I think it's a 4-story, maybe 3-story light industrial building,
Yeah.
which has a proper, full height ground floor and
Yeah.
freight elevator and the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the challenge that will be faced will be the cost considerations of just putting up a tilt-up building in these parks versus going vertical
Yeah.
with it. So I think you should encourage people to go vertical where it still serves a true industrial use
Yeah.
as much as you can.
Yeah, and there's another piece to this where we're really trying to rework the permitted uses in the business park to retain as much industrial as possible. And I think our intention is to provide the opportunity for that. I think we're probably a ways away from the value to be there for developers to do that, but we don't want any barriers to people doing that if it gets to that point. So it's more about removing barriers. In the business park, we don't see problems with increased height. It doesn't impact neighbors. It's not a negative consequence for adjacent properties. And we want to keep that way. So, that's why we don't want to have uses come in that could complain about that. So that's that one. I don't hear any comments. I'm going to move on.
When you say light industrial, does that mean adding more flexibility for the type of industry that you want to have?
So good question. So the light industrial zone that we have, the I1 zone, has over time been commercialized.
Yeah.
The history is that there were a few situations where there were uses in I1 zone that didn't match, and so as part of the last zoning bylaw or a zoning bylaw update, those uses just got grandfathered in and became permitted uses. The consequence of that was one of those unintended and unanticipated issues where those uses have proliferated. We are not interested in that. We've actually stripped those uses through a recent bylaw that has caused some concern. So we do have to find homes in the business park. I think eventually we're going to have a stratification north to south on the business park with more permissive, allowing some commercialized uses at the far north end, and then trying to have more restrictive zoning as you move south to what I would say is a more pure light industrial product. Okay. Facilitated affordable housing. This is actually a bit about ADUs at this point, and really about ensuring that ADUs continue to, accessory dwelling units, carriage houses, continue to be a housing product that is accepted in the community, and we get more of and don't get pushed back around. We see this as a big success in terms of adding places for people to live. But there is often concern from neighbors around the impacts of those popping up in the neighbor's backyard. So this is around trying to manage that. So the first one is consider options to address ADU height and massing to improve compatibility within the existing neighborhood. There has been concerns about the height and the impact on neighboring properties of some of these popping up. And so some of the options that are under consideration are some reduced percentage of floor space that can be on the second floor, to have some setbacks to pull back some of that upper height story from the neighbor's kind of property line, or some kind of angle, like creating an angled envelope around the ADU to again pull in the massing, and also to scale or to work on the form and character of those units a bit, so they don't feel like little silos popping up in the backyard. Thoughts on this? Concerns, considerations?
I think it's a really good approach. It really should read almost like a small coach house or a modified garage rather than a big development that's going in the backyard.
Yeah.
Kitsilano is doing this really well, where it's just all kind of integrated in. It feels like it's inherently connected to the home. It's not. It's a good approach where you retain the character of the community overall, but you're allowing for that density.
Yeah.
So it's finding that balance.
And there could be strategies that involve more bureaucratic process with examination and permitting. I think we're going to try and get away from that and craft something that maybe doesn't do it perfectly, but does still achieve some of the goals, which would be the regulatory structure.
Like down the road, it'd be good to know what your maximum is for your maximum lot size.
Yeah.
Just to get an understanding of
Explain.
how restrictive is your maximum single-family home lot size that is being contemplated.
Right.
Just to get an understanding of where that sits on the spectrum
Right.
available.
And haven't come up with anything at this
Right,
point.
yeah.
So that's early days and open to thoughts and considerations. But you're thinking like, if we go small, and then are we gonna get stuffed in with trying to go smaller spaces, but also allow the carriage units, and then does that?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think
Yeah.
one of the biggest issues that I see in bringing all this additional density online, well, there's two. One of them is the floodplain difference. So a lot of these secondary suites are being constructed in areas that didn't have flood requirements and now do. So then you get that
Yeah.
difference in massing.
Yeah.
The other one is parking and the fact that everyone drives. And so even if you have a suite and it's a one-bedroom suite, you may have 2 to 3 cars associated with that suite. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we're not there yet in our town where a lot of people are commuting without a vehicle.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just some consideration of that.
Sure, yeah.
Parking requirement, and like it all mixes together. But
These are great topics, and actually, so on that, I'll just give you kind of my perception on the first item you mentioned, which is the kind of awkwardness that we have from FCL and new construction being out of sync with the character of existing neighborhoods. And I think I think of it as a teenage stage, like we're just going to be awkward.
Yep.
And over time, every house that redevelops is going to have to meet that standard. And so I think that's when we've got to like just kind of say, okay, it's going to be uncomfortable for a while. And then try and use maybe some of these, how much of that second story is going to be 100%, like are we going to pull it back a little bit and try and reduce that? But I think that's going to be an ongoing impact that's unfortunate. And even with new home construction adjacent, I think that's a little bit of it's hard to address that because we're so constrained by the floodplain and our ability to go low and address parking. And then the second piece around parking, that I think that's a question that it needs to be addressed at a policy level with council. How far, and that is a question we're going to have, or a discussion we're going to have with council, how far are we willing to go to create housing forms and building forms that are appropriate for a different style of transportation across the community, knowing that it isn't going to work in the interim, and how much we're willing to compromise to make it work for the interim. And I suspect that there's going to be an interest from staff's level and a recommendation from staff level that we accept more discomfort in the short term.
Yeah, I think you said it really correctly, that there's a teenage phase that this
Yeah.
community is going to be going through for the next foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I think the transportation one in particular is a really significant issue, and I think we're going to see a lot of discomfort downtown as the construction we've approved gets built out. But I worry that if we are hesitant about committing to that path, that we'll never get to a place where we actually overcome some of the hurdles by creating a denser structure and a transportation network that works. So I suspect that a staff's perspective is let's plow straight ahead and double down on it. But yeah, I think it's going to be awkward.
For this one too, I'd say the open space ratio is really critical so that we don't start seeing developments where there's very minor space between the main dwelling and the subdwelling, and no yard, no open space, no permeability.
Yeah, so that permeable space is probably the biggest place to catch that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just open space in general. You wouldn't want to see it turn to wall buildings.
Yeah, okay. Separation. So you're saying the separation between primary and ADU is critical?
Yeah. Particularly for those folks within that community that aren't going to be having that secondary suite. They're living there for a specific character of the community.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I'm going to move on. Provide higher FAR to RS1 and RS1A properties with the suites and ADUs. So in the RS2 zone, we did an update to that and added a couple like missing middle housing forms in the last year. And one of the things we did is the current FAR ratio allows a higher FAR as your property gets bigger, which is counterintuitive. I think it's a poor strategy. That's what we had in RS1 and RS2. So we got rid of that and we said you get a higher FAR. You go from 0.45 to 0.5 when you add an ADU or a secondary suite. So trying to incentivize and give a benefit to adding those housing forms that could work for a variety of people. And so the idea would be to just take that into RS1. I think providing more FAR on bigger land is not advantageous or beneficial for our community. Please. Comments on that one?
Agreed.
Okay. Establish maximum lot sizes for single detached dwellings. This is just, and I would say single detached is not a housing form that we're really trying to encourage or drive towards on a policy level, but certainly they're out there, and we will see more, I'm sure, at some point. But a consumptive development style that has big lots isn't appealing, because we're all constantly thinking about where we're going to put people to live and where people are going to work, and that doesn't help either of those really. So haven't come up with any numbers, but thinking of just constraining, and I don't think we have a huge problem with big single-family lots being developed, so it may not even really be a factor or an issue, but just as a matter of principle.
Would that have a filter where it was applicable to sort of downtown
No, this
area
would be
lots,
across.
and then
This is everywhere, suburbs.
Everywhere.
Yeah. Just like let's not have big lots.
My only comment would be like, you look at the Highlands as an example, there's some lots that have a lot of unusable space, but their lot size is like
Right.
Yeah.
a quarter acre or half an acre kind of thing.
Yeah.
Half an acre
Just
thing.
thinking like New Alice Lake lots or something, south of there, they could, be pushed because the half of their lot is a cliff.
Yeah, okay, so it should not apply where there are limits to development, like environment and terrain.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sound good? Moving on. Relaxing regulations. So here are some of those. Permitting below grade steps as projections into interior setbacks. So it's not always possible with FCLs to have these, but where there are below grade steps, we sometimes end up doing variances to allow those because we want to consume some of the interior side setback, and so we're just saying it doesn't seem to create a major impact on neighbors if there's a set of stairs going down So we're thinking that we should just by right allow a bit more of that. Comments on that?
Does the same, so I know that previous bylaws, they allowed for stairs within the setback, like above.
Above, yes.
Above grade, and that was taken out?
Okay, I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure on the
Right.
details of that, but was it restricted or?
Yeah, you
You
can.
can't,
No.
right. And is that something that everyone here would support?
I think it's just for the interior setbacks though, right?
Yeah,
That are
we're
allowed
talking about interior
In
with
the
this one.
back, yeah.
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 Just as if planning consider, I don't know if it's worth looking at, but
Right. So is your thought that,
I don't see like if there's a passageway, you know, it speaks to permeability, but in some cases there's lots that's kind of step up at the back
yeah,
of the lot, for instance, that those steps in a side setback, I don't particularly see as an issue.
right, so you're
But-
saying this isn't a bad idea and also above
Yeah,
ground
also,
steps?
yeah.
Could also apply to above ground.
Maybe there should be like a limit to that, I think, because you don't want a set of stairs like right adjacent or right on your property line, right? Because then
Yeah.
if somebody does that next door,
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
likely wouldn't.
So you want to maintain some level of setback, not all the way obviously, but
Well, I think so, to just allow access around the property as well, right?
yeah,
Even just
Is it
3
about-
feet or
So there'd
something
be a
to
max
get by.
width like a 3 foot or something.
Yeah.
Because I guess then the second one is you then have to allow awnings into that setback to cover those stairs, is
Yeah.
that
right.
I'm just imagining the worst case scenario
Right.
when you have 5 flights of stairs up a steep lot and
Yeah.
5 separate awnings, that's all just
Right.
allowable. And
Right.
people will push.
Yeah, so I'll say that with a caveat that was my experience in one very specific property, so I'll defer to the experts on that one if
Okay.
it's not worth pursuing, which it sounds like it's not. Let's just, well, I don't know.
I don't know if it's not worth, yeah.
Yeah, I would be for it, but I think you still have to keep travel paths around.
Okay, with
Because
provided
you
travel
have a
paths are still.
problem with an
Yeah.
ADU too, you have steps set back. With an ADU, you had a unit there.
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
ADUs would be a separate, like they would
Yeah.
not, you need to have there's definitely an established requirement for access there, so it
Oh,
can
okay.
consume that.
Perhaps it goes without saying, but certainly the property line grades would have to be maintained, so if they were to put a stairwell nearby the property line, they have to ensure that they're not making any changes to the adjacent, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
you could see that could get pretty wild pretty quick, and
Yeah, okay, yeah. So provided,
that's not
great,
clearly stated.
Okay,
And the awnings comment isn't necessarily tied to the stairs, it's more generally, like, it's awning, or for the awnings, is that commercial? Is it residential?
the awnings,
Yeah.
it's really commercial, we're
Commercial,
commercial
yeah.
industrial.
Yeah, so
It's not residential,
I have a strong endorsement for that.
for the commercial residential.
Yeah, to increase the ability to project in setbacks with awnings, because I think that's something that our rainy town needs
Yeah.
in a lot more places.
Okay, yeah, strong support. Yeah, totally, we don't, yeah, that one, we don't want to create barriers to having full coverage. I think we have a projection.
Are you not
that's-
allowed to project 32 inches right now?
Yeah, I think we want to provide the opportunity to do a full projection over whatever walkway is there.
But there's a minimum distance to property line?
Yeah, this one, let me see here. Yeah, like presumably there would still be a minimum distance if there's any kind of fire, safety issues or building code, but, you know, anywhere where there's a walkway, we want to try and get coverage for those and we wouldn't want to be
You
held
don't
out.
want to come very close to property
Okay.
because of combustibility.
Yeah, provided it doesn't cause a building code issue, yeah.
Cleaning up the gases, so
Yeah. So there needs to be a minimum.
minimum
Mi-
distance.
Must be a minimum distance, yeah, minimum distance for building code. Okay, next one is, permit steps down from rear or side decks to project into your side setbacks. So,
I think same as
same,
the other
yeah.
one,
Yeah.
Basically, provided there's not an issue with building setbacks, building safety requirements, and that there is a pathway, a travel pathway.
2 feet.
Okay, next one is, do not require the corner visibility triangle to extend above the first floor. So we've actually got an example just over here. It's on 3rd, where they've got on the 2nd story they're coming out, right? Because we have the corner there needs to be visibility as you come around, but that really should only be required at the 1st story, and then beyond that, if they want a cantilever out over top of that, we want to make sure that that's clear that that's a possibility.
Better to have a height limit about 3 meters? Or
Sure, yeah, okay. Is that a thought? People think there should be a minimum height at that corner? Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Amend projections into setbacks to address commercial industrial properties. This one is
You missed one there.
Oh, you missed
Yeah.
reduce RS1 setbacks for 33-foot wide lots. Okay, so this one, I can't remember where this one came from, but there's interest in, with lots that are narrower and have more trouble fitting everything in to reduce the front setback. I will say that there's been an ongoing discussion around whether or not our current front setbacks are appropriate as they are across a much larger range of residential properties. Given that we have space constraints, if we're pushing houses back, there's less room for ADUs or other uses. So there's, obviously that would be an exacerbation of issues around neighborhood character if some buildings start moving forward. But ultimately, how committed are we to front lawns of grass?
Yeah, it's a waste.
It's total waste,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that in principle. I think it's going to be a challenge in some neighborhoods though, how it's brought online. Like I think that should be the policy for new subdivisions to allow for reduced
Yeah.
front setbacks, but I worry about, it'll make those awkward teen years a bit more awkward.
Yeah, for a long time.
Neighbors out there.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Yeah. But I think in those areas where you're contemplating potentially allowing for more density,
Yeah,
like states, and that's still being talked about. but
yeah, yeah.
Like Garibaldi Estates or areas like that, you probably may want to test that encouragement
Yeah.
to reduce that front setback.
My one concern would be public realm. It's
Yeah.
often challenging enough to get ample space for trees and sidewalks, etc. And I would hate to lose that opportunity because the buildings are so far forward that you just don't have the capacity to get any substantial tree canopy in.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's like 7.5 right now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so what do you think, like 4 or something?
yeah. I looked around at what other places, have, and there's certainly areas where they're, far less.
Yeah.
I think anything too dramatic would be super awkward. In existing neighborhoods as new houses. It would be a big impact if, bigger houses were right up front. So there's probably only so far that you could go, but yeah, maybe half the current setbacks. It just, in a place that's constrained and where we're trying to utilize our land as efficiently as possible, is that much land, for grass makes sense.
Do you have a number in mind? How much?
Maybe half of it, 3 something, 3.5 or 4. Yeah.
I don't know how everyone else feels, but I feel like if you took an approach of identifying areas where that would be an easy to do, I'm thinking like downtown where there are alleys.
Right.
Like in the city, it's when that's implemented, and you have an alleyway, you get like front porches and there's ways to make all of that work really nicely.
Yeah.
You do have to have appropriate street trees and subdivision standards so that you're not getting rid of a lot of that green space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think like going into like Westway Avenue, if you were to change the setbacks there, that would suddenly become a very funny smile as you
It would.
went down the road.
It
Yeah.
would, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so maybe it's only for new subdivisions in the short term, or if there's a summary plan created, maybe that would be one of the areas that we tackle at that time, right? So the States and Finch are areas where there's going to be, over time, summary planning and probably significant redevelopment, and maybe that's the areas where they go. Maybe we don't tackle it right now, but we earmark it for those zones in the future. Okay, great. Next one, amend projections into setbacks to address commercial industrial projects. Oh, right, yeah, okay, yeah. So, this is where we're trying to bring commercial industrial projects up to right to the setback line. But there's like the business park where we have FCL that pushes up where the start of construction begins. Then there's a wall there, and if ideally we have a set of stairs that comes down to reaches towards the sidewalk or wherever the access is off the road. And if we don't allow those projections of stairs to come down and provide that access, then it makes access to the walkways that we often try and get in front of those units from the sides and more challenging. So providing that opportunity for those stairwells to reach down into the setback. There's a challenge with flood and the requirements to not obstruct floodwaters, but that's the concept there. Thoughts on that?
Does porch have a defined width? Because someone will do the entire width of the building as a...
Yeah, okay, yeah, I think we'd probably just try to keep it to stairs, so maybe it would just be about the access.
Okay.
But that's a good point, so don't let it get abused.
So this is specific to the floodplain area, not outside?
That's where it's been driven from, and so that'd probably be a good point to restrict it to that use.
I think it'd be good to clarify, because if it's not in the floodplain, it would be probably, if there's a site that has significant slope, then you'd probably want to encourage the building to start stepping down and terracing with the landscape rather than having one FFE and then trying to fight this 2 meter.
Right,
So
okay, yeah.
just being careful where.
Well, if we constrain it to the floodplain, then that would
Yeah.
remove that issue entirely because it would,
Yeah.
it
I think there is value though in a kind of standard site outside of the floodplain where you do have a lot of grade changes, which you certainly do up in the, how to mitigate that, because you don't want to start seeing huge walls in there either.
Right.
It's just maybe having 2 versions of it, one for the flood and one for slope site.
Okay, next one, increase height in industrial zone to allow more useful space. That's along the lines of what we said. Again, not sure it's going to get taken advantage in the short run by just removing any kind of barriers to increasing the amount of employment land in the.
Yeah.
I think that Leon Lebanese building was a perfect example that came to EDP a few months ago, and we kind of resoundingly said, yes, increase the height.
Yeah.
Make it as usable as possible.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to increase the height just for the sake of it, because that costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if they're going to
totally.
do it, they're going to do it for good reason.
Yeah, just don't want a barrier. Yeah, okay. You want us to be back for just hanging out or?
Just hanging out.
Hanging out, great, okay.
Just chilling.
You must like zoning. Okay, clarify, now so we're on to clarifying regulations. Clarify C4 building setbacks for properties abutting residential, civic, and assembly uses. This is, there's, in the C4 zone, this is the interior side lot and exterior side lot line setback, where a lot abuts another lot developed with their zone for any residential, civic, or assembly use. No principal building shall be located within 1.52 meters of the property line that is shared by the lot and the adjacent lot developed with their zone for residential, civic, or assembly use. So the intention is we don't want to slam up a big building against an adjacent residential property right to their lot line. There are places where C4 abuts, like an RS1 or RS2, I think, few different lots like that, and so having a huge wall on your property line isn't appealing. So there's a setback level, but then it becomes complicated when we're in the downtown area where residential is permitted on C4, and so then is that a residential use? So operationally, we're not utilizing it in the way that it's written. We allow C4 in the downtown where to go side by side at the lot line. So we probably need to clarify that and make that reflect what's actually going on. But then there's the balance with what to do with these situations where C4 does abut RS2. And maybe it, rather than just referencing residential, maybe it's referencing specific zones, because residential can be encompassed in mixed use where we could end up having a desirable zero lot line. Thoughts on that?
Does that setback change if the heights of the buildings change? So if you have a potential zoning where one property has, say, 3 stories and the other one's 1 story, does that setback potentially?
I don't think we have a variable kind of setback in that situation.
Yeah.
Is that something you think?
Well, I was just curious, so, if it's a 2-story building versus 3-story building, that 1.5 meters changes quite quickly in
Yeah.
terms of what it offers.
Yeah, and then one of the challenges with that, so that could be a strategy, but then if somebody's developing without the knowledge of how the adjacent is going to develop over time, then that could be more confounding.
That's fair. That's fair.
I think one of the struggles is will there be single-family homes in downtown Squamish in 100 years?
Yeah,
And if we're building these buildings for 100 years,
Yes, less than.
Yeah.
50 years.
how should we address it? It's
Yeah.
more of a philosophical question, I think.
more awkwardness in the short run.
Kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
It would be a shame to reduce that density and then, 5 years later, that adjacent parcel come for rezoning and
it's getting
they had
consolidated.
the exact same building form and suddenly you could have had.
Yeah.
Little tunnels in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. This is the issue, is that, and which is why it hasn't been utilized in the way that it's actually written. So what's the thought then? That plan for the, build for the long term?
C4 is entirely downtown, is it not?
Yes, yeah. It stretches up towards the highway, but it's couple.
So can it be removed, that? I mean, is that an option?
We can do whatever we want, yeah.
Power.
Yeah, or we can propose whatever we want.
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, I don't think anyone wants those tunnels, and it kind of goes against everything we've just been talking about increasing density to
Yeah,
suddenly have
exactly.
a clause that can actually stop someone building to the
Yeah.
exterior, especially downtown. So I
But what do you do in those places where there are RS2 right next, like somebody's living there right now in that single family house? Like I hear you saying, well, but literally there's like a C4 next to your house. You bought a little bungalow.
well, it's a
Time to sell.
fact of
Trying to
life.
sell.
It's a fact of life of living downtown,
Yeah.
and in New York they have churches that are right next to
Yeah.
100-story
Yeah.
skyscrapers.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just part of the fabric, but
Fair enough. So
Yeah.
I'm hearing people say that.
We kind of went through this with the Elevation Collective one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't they have a house right beside?
Is that Chris Hunter's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they wanted zero
That's
lot
a
line.
that's a
Exactly.
good example.
Right at the side.
yeah.
Yeah.
Except the residential use.
That's
it's an industrial.
that's in a mud zone.
Yeah, or
No,
He
it's
rezoned
C4,
by-
but
but
it's
it's
in.
next-
like-
They're mud.
They're
Like,
mud.
Is it mud?
Mud.
Yeah.
but same
Oh.
issue. It is the same issue.
Yeah.
Alternatively, you can have 1 floor, 0 signal,
Right.
and then sit back at the second floor.
Okay.
The only problem then is limiting distance calcs. You'll just get a single wall with
Yeah.
tiny little windows or sprinkler curtains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there an option if property A had to do the 1.5 meters, 10 years later, property B develops and they also need the 1.5, so now you have a 3-meter wide corridor?
Mid-block connection.
Exactly.
Quote, unquote.
It's just the nature of how it goes out. Yeah,
10 feet.
Like a conditional setback if X is done.
dependent on the adjacent use,
Okay.
potentially. I
Then
don't
you
know.
don't need
That's the
to
tricky
redesign
one.
It's
it.
tricky.
I would suggest, I would encourage you to write it a bit aggressively to encourage more density in the downtown.
Be aggressive.
Yeah.
Because I think that is the solution to some of our woes.
And you can see how downtown's changing, right? If you just,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 I would just go 0 and let the architects figure it out.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
That's what I say.
Is that why?
Do that. Okay, moving on. God, where did the time go? Okay, clarify how to determine how open space requirements for projects with apartments and townhouses. Okay, so we have 2 different calculations, which assumes that you have a townhouse project or you have an apartment project. And sometimes there's both, and then the calculation becomes, it's not written up clearly how that calculation should be made for open space. So presumption is we just have to prorate it between the two. Like if there's this many units, you do have to add this, and this many units, you have to add them together and create it. I think it's pretty straightforward, but it's not straightforward in the way it's written right now. Okay, next, so that sounds good. Next one, clarify exemptions of common stairwells from GFA. That one, there is an exemption for stairwells if you're doing a multifamily. But it's not written very well in the bylaw, and so we've had people say, well, we're doing a single family, or can we utilize that? And it's not written clearly that you can't, so it's just to clarify that it's only for multifamily.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yep.
Specify that garage floor only be exempted from GFA once. So there's an exemption for garages. That's even a question, actually, something to discuss whether or not we want to continue that, because anyway, it's a different issue, but not to contemplate that part of this. But certainly don't want to exempt multiple garages. It is, people do apply for that at times when you have a garage in house and then do an ADU, and so
Is there a max square meter exemption? Because I know there isn't with
So,
SIR,
yeah,
but I don't.
yeah.
There is.
I believe so, yeah.
600?
Yeah, but yeah, I think so, but I think it doesn't clearly specify that's only for one, and so we want to clarify that's for
Okay.
one.
I would just, it'd be good to understand how that affects accessory dwelling units and do a few test cases, like just grab a few lots in town and say, okay, if we did this and they had their garage and it's already 600, you know,
Yeah,
you may discourage accessory dwelling units with a garage if you go that route, which I think is
Yeah.
not the purpose.
right, okay, yeah, fair enough.
And if there is, like the previous one, an open space ratio requirement, then you're gonna already be kind of having to decide one or the other at some point, so.
Right. Although, one thing on that is if we do provide higher FAR for people who have ADUs, then all of a sudden that exemption, by adding that, the ADU, you're getting extra FAR.
Unless you're in a floodplain.
Right, okay.
So that, like, sometimes I think what people deal with is that they go and do an accessory dwelling unit, they put a garage in because they have to.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just building stills, so you might as well put storage in there because
Yeah.
you know your tenant's gonna have a bike, or you have 6, and you need somewhere for it to go. So, yeah, I don't think it's the word. It may be restricted to the floodplain, where you get that double exemption,
Right, okay.
because otherwise that space is unusable, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Just a general knowledge question, are GFA exclusions applicable to ADUs?
GFA exemption, well, that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Right. Well,
Is that the carriage house out?
Yeah.
ADU.
is it applicable in general
It is?
though?
So we're,
Okay.
that's the question, is that
Okay.
appropriate?
But as Matt said, if we bump up the FAR, then whether you're in the floodplain or not, like, you can still build a garage, it just would be
Right.
calculated as part of your floor area,
Right.
which will then be higher.
So I don't think, I'm not saying that wouldn't work, I would just say test it in a few cases, varying size lots, to see if it becomes a restriction.
Okay, next one. Ensure gross floor area calculation provisions exist for all commercial, industrial, and potentially other zones. Right now, we have a set of exemptions which are written up as being for residential, but probably makes sense to apply those to industrial, and it might even be calculated that way currently, but it doesn't actually say that, so that's clarifying the regulatory calculation. That makes sense? Change height definition so the height is measured from a single established point. So we actually have this wacky thing with how our heights are calculated. Has anybody looked at how the
Yes.
height data?
Many times.
Yeah, so it's not super simple, the way it's done, based on the height datum. Height datum is there's the height datum in the front and rear, and then there's a line that goes from the front to the rear, and the height is along that point. I think operationally, the way building does is they establish a single point and measure from that, as opposed to along the line, which doesn't quite line up with it. So I think what we want to do is just make this match what's actually happening to create a single point that is the height point, the data point from which we're measuring. And there's a question about whether that's the mean of the corners or median between the fronts. I think the median's a bit easier to determine.
Mhm.
Building has expressed a bit of an interest in the median as opposed to the mean. But I don't think we're actually even doing it exactly the way it's written in the zoning bylaw. It's not really practical.
From a customer service
Yes,
perspective, when
yes.
I was working on my house, which is located in a neighborhood that had a height definition different to this, I don't know if you've experienced this in any of your builds, but like we essentially got our building permit,
Yeah.
and then halfway through had a neighbor tell us that they ran into some issues,
Yeah.
and came back to the building department and were like, oh, actually, we've approved this permit for you, but you're at 1.5 feet over what you should be.
Was that because on the subdivision plan you had?
Perhaps it could be, yeah, it was, yeah. So I
It
don't
happened
know.
to us
From a user perspective,
Right,
and someone who,
right.
I feel like I'm a little bit familiar with zoning,
Yeah.
it'd be great if there was a way to
Highlight it here?
highlight that, or at
Okay.
least the building department to highlight
So
that.
this
And
could
that's not
say,
be separate,
this
but
could say,
yes.
if a subdivision plan exists with established height, then.
call it out, be like, if you
Yeah.
are in these subdivisions, talk to the building department, lest you
Find yourself
have a
looking at-
mid-project freak out, yeah. And that's just like, I think little things like that in the zoning bylaw help the municipalities so much, because you don't have people thinking that it's some kind of
Nefarious.
exactly like nefarious position. It's purely like, there are layers to all of these things, and
Totally.
I don't, yeah.
So that big list of 140, it's actually 160 now, and it keeps adding things to it. But that list is our attempt to try and capture those things.
Okay,
But
great.
if you guys ever are like, oh, hey, I just saw another problem with the zoning bylaw that makes it harder to use or unclear or whatnot, just please email me, like mgunn@squamish.ca. Here's a thing to fix in the zoning bylaw. Just let me know, because I don't know all those little pieces that are actually causing problems. So let me know. Don't hesitate to reach out. Okay. Address regulatory weaknesses. Oh yeah, there's this issue with our accessory dwelling unit maximum height. So we have a max height in the general reg section, but then it doesn't, there's a bit of conflict with maximum heights for accessory dwelling units that are scattered through the zones. There are situations where they don't match, so we want to pull those out of each of the zones so that it's just in the one location, which is in the general reg section to drive that maximum height. That kind of gets to what you're talking about, Carlos.
Yeah, that's great.
But there are lots of those. And the problem, of course, is that we're worried that with any big project like this, we're going to create a whole set of new ones. Anyway, let's hope not. Update parking regulations. One is to develop regulations for parking garages, things like grades, turn aisles, and minimum distances for columns. But we don't have anything like that for parking, and I think there are some examples that we can just crib from and implement. So that's one. Clarify visitor requirements for residential parking downtown. So it's a bit vague. We don't require it at this point. We just need to make that clear in the zoning. Clarify off-street loading areas shall not be located within required front or side yard setbacks. It actually says within front yards or side yards, but there aren't front yards or side yards. So that's, again, it's just not clear. Define width of a practical access driveway. This is the driveway that will provide access to an ADU. And right now we say that we have to have it, but it doesn't actually say how wide it has to be. So we actually need to say, it's not ADU, it's a garage in the backyard that could have an ADU. So sometimes we get people saying, hey, I'm building a garage back here to get my ADU, and then actually that garage never is going to have a car in it. It's just a workshop. So it's kind of working our system to get a workshop and an ADU.
Is that a bad thing?
Well,
It's bad when people start living in the workshop, which happens a lot.
Right.
if we want to say, hey, you can have a workshop and an ADU, then our zoning should probably say, well, let's have a workshop and an ADU, rather than it has to be a garage in these situations with the ADU above. Otherwise, it just makes the ADUs much bigger. And when we're talking about trying to minimize the impacts of those ADUs on a neighbor so that it's palatable and we can keep doing this kind of stuff and there isn't a reaction against it, if we allow them to just become actual, much larger structures, doubling the size by having that garage that never sees a car. So part of it is to actually have a requirement that there's a road that can go in, because sometimes we get these proposals where there's actually, doesn't even look like there's a chance for the car to get back there. So a minimum width of the driveway to get there.
Somebody couldn't have their place rezoned as a live work space with the garage, because you mentioned people living in your garage.
Yeah, so people could live and work in a space, but it couldn't be like it would have to be within the size requirements that the ADUs are allowed to have at this point. It's just a matter of scale or how big these things get. So they couldn't double them in size at this point because we're trying to minimize the impacts on neighbors.
Okay.
I'll just suggest that there are a lot of properties in Squamish that have access issues for vehicles. For instance, a lot of them, if there's some power lines and right-of-ways that are in place that separate lots, larger lots, especially in Brackendale.
Yeah,
And you could open up a lot of area for potential accessory dwelling units with or without a garage, and I get it.
yeah.
Maybe not a garage or a workshed, but if the goal was to encourage more,
Yeah.
I know that there are a number of lots in Squamish
Where you
where
can't drive
perhaps
in the
you
back.
can't drive in the back.
Yeah, but so we're not trying to limit them putting ADUs back there. It's okay.
So you're just limiting
It's-
ADUs with garage?
Yeah, because what happens is people,
Yep.
yeah, if you want to put an ADU, okay, that's cool. The problem is people are like, oh, but I'm going to put a garage there, so they get a bigger structure, which comes into the problem where, you know, the neighbors don't necessarily like having these big structures, right? And so we allow them to go on top of garages because that often you already have a garage there, maybe you put it on top, or you're going to put a garage, well, we want to get a carriage house there. But we don't necessarily want to say, just put big second houses in your backyard. We're trying to scale that. And if the need for the garage isn't there, we don't want it to become this much bigger structure.
So
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
if they have a lot that's in Brackendale, it's FCL, and they have no access to the back of it, they can't put an ADU in there, if they have no access? Because then it's gotta sit on top of a garage.
Yeah.
Or stilts.
Or stilts, yeah.
So then, most of Brackendale wouldn't, unless you have a super.
Yeah, that does create that challenge. You know, I think we have our first stilts project that's come down the line. And that's maybe a possibility that then doesn't mitigate the impact on neighbors because you do have something up high. That's an awkward piece with the flood hazard. Yeah, so that's something to consider is what do you do in those areas like Brackendale where there's a flip side to that where we're trying not to densify Brackendale
Yeah.
too because the more people that go into Brackendale in the event of a major dike breach, the more problems we have evacuating. So there is a reason not to necessarily pack that. It's definitely the highest highest hazard in terms of velocity and depth of floodwaters. Okay, some good thoughts there. Cruise on, modifying parking regulations. Okay, tandem parking. Create a definition for tandem parking and considering the suitability of this parking style. Thoughts on tandem parking? What do people think about it?
I think in commercial it makes a lot of sense.
Hey, I'm thinking about residential. This is really around townhouses
Right.
with front and back. So people propose it to meet the parking regs, but there's concern around whether or not that parking actually is usable, and that just ends up as massive gear storage. It's around usability. It does do cars end up in those spots, and then does that flow out onto impacts to the neighborhood? But it's a concern. Certainly, it's come up.
Yeah.
I think I think the tandem garage parking is, no one I know uses that. There's maybe one in 20
But there's two cars.
who would go through the rigmarole of, oh, I need to use the car now, come downstairs, you know. If it's a parking spot and you know,
Yeah.
I think if the two interior
Yes.
parking spots, that's the one that I think isn't really realistic.
Yeah, so part of the discussion is like, okay, if we're gonna allow that, should it be just a proportion? Like maybe 20% could be tandem in a development,
Yeah.
which effectively is just saying they're skipping out on some of the parking regs.
Yeah.
Do you allow for the elevators? One on top of each other?
I haven't had that discussion with anybody. I don't know if we've ever talked about that.
Is it allowed?
Well, I don't think we have like a prohibition on it. I just don't know that it's been proposed at this point. So I don't know that we've gone through and considered it.
What do you mean like vertical parking?
It's very
We haven't
cheap.
seen that here yet.
Very cheap.
It's very cheap.
4,000.
Really?
Huh.
Basically just a car lift?
Huh.
It comes from.
Well, maybe we should put something about that in there.
$20,000 cheaper than a parking spot.
Yeah. And then if you use height, then you can have two parkings. Some of them actually you don't need to move the other one. It just moves ups and downs so they can move if you make it fit.
It's like a
Oh,
car
like
vending
one
machine.
drops and one comes down.
Yeah.
Well,
Not
So-
that easy.
let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think an approach where you have a percentage is probably wise because there are some situations where it may be the only thing that works in awkward lots.
Yeah.
And I think in that event, it's better to have a unit there
Nothing.
than
Then
nothing.
But a concept of limiting the scope to how many of those, does that seem to make sense to people? What are you thinking?
Tandem parking has the benefit of allowing for thinner,
Narrow, yeah, totally.
narrower
Which is why it's
townhouses,
popular.
so we can get, you know, rather than that double.
Yeah,
So I'm not too against it.
okay, so you're not against it, and you are,
You're me.
If indoor tandem park, like, I think if you have a tandem parking where you've got a parking pad,
yeah, I thought, yeah, carport, this is one thing I thought is like, have a carport in front of a,
Sure.
because the carport isn't gonna be storage then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
but if it's
less
tandem, like Carlos said, in a garage, then technically they're still meeting the requirements, but then you have the car problem, so I don't think it should be I don't think it should be allowed at all, not limited.
Okay, so you're saying, it doesn't bother me, you're saying we shouldn't even have that, you're like, maybe a percentage,
Yeah.
got a range of ideas?
Outside is fine, inside.
Outside is fine,
Consensus.
yeah.
Welcome to design.
Yeah.
No consent.
Indoor tandem bad or okay, that's all right.
It's good, okay, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Okay, any other comments on that one? I'm coming very close to needing to cruise on. Update multifamily development parking requirements with proper driveways and garages for Squamish vehicles. And this is kind of gets into the next one, the sizes, that maybe there should be a requirement for the parking size to be actually be a bit bigger than it is, because lots of the cars don't fit in it. But then in areas where there's a lot of parking required, have more small stalls permitted, like have a smaller small and a bigger normal, and have a greater number of smaller allowed in larger, especially commercial developments, but still have those larger ones for the Squamish cars that don't fit in the normal ones. Thoughts on this?
What are we calling Squamish cars?
I was gonna say,
Like,
the giant trucks.
giant-
Trucks, yeah.
Ford had one.
The trucks don't fit in Grindville.
Yeah.
It's realistic.
So do we increase the size of our garages, or do we force people to get smaller cars?
Force people to get smaller.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think
we're-
I personally don't think catering to someone who's going to buy an F350 downtown
Okay,
is a good progressive way to go.
yeah, okay, fair enough, good comment.
Are you also gonna, and I'm sorry I don't see it in here, put in a requirement for electrical charging stations?
Yeah, there's a whole nother discussion
Oh,
around
okay,
that,
sorry.
and, you know, I think one of the considerations that we'd like to talk to council about is having a requirement for infrastructure for everything, for every stall. It's a consideration that we've been talking about, we haven't like gone forward with that, but yeah, having infrastructure.
It would probably be good to come back and speak to this group here, because I don't know about you all, but in planning for 100% electrified stalls, there are some pretty serious,
I was gonna say,
and like,
energy.
there's a lack of understanding, even from like a supply side, from BC Hydro, about how you plan for that and
Right,
mixed charging use. There's a whole new field of,
Big problem.
it's a big problem.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it's a big problem,
Big
okay.
problem.
And not to say we shouldn't be going that direction,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
yeah.
But it needs
Just how do
more
you address it
investigation.
better? Yeah, when
Your
you're-
power demands for each building go up
Yeah,
Right,
by a huge factor.
so you build
So then-
substations everywhere.
Well, and that's a problem, right?
Yeah, it can.
right, okay, good point. And then consider shared use of off-street loading requirements between different uses, in particular like office and commercial, like not having onerous off-street loading for office uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, and last one, review of parking regulations table, that's kind of a big topic, but with kind of like noting ones that we think could be reduced. And generally the idea is around reducing some of those parking requirements on the table.
Yeah.
Again, to what we talked about, like kind of doubling down on need to move to a different transportation.
So we would look at kind of like a blanket rewriting of that to allow for car share vehicles to count
Yeah.
for a certain amount of.
Haven't contemplated the car share piece of it as part of this yet, but, you know, could, but, yeah, I guess not having like a really well-established car share here at this point makes it a bit challenging.
I think it would be, because anything to do with car shares in other municipalities tends to be related to money. So, you know, the district would be taking money into a pot and then using that for car share maybe in the future, but because we're not sure of the, you know, how long it's gonna take, and maybe by the time we get there, car share is an old thing and there's something else, we might maybe consider doing a fund for some sort of transportation alternatives.
Okay, those are the topics I wanted to talk about. There's a whole list of other topics that are on that other sheet, and I'm totally open to comments and input or suggestions on other topics that should be there that are. but I'm gonna call it there. I gotta go get my kid. So, and I think Jesse's gonna talk to you about something else, so.
19.6.c,
Which one's that?
consider options for encouraging and incentivizing or mandating energy efficient practices in the design, construction, retrofitting, renovation of buildings.
Yes.
I would just,
You wanna talk about that?
well, I would just strongly recommend looking at opportunities to encourage and incentivize. I think some developers and single family home builders will do it on their own accord, but
Yeah,
the more the district can encourage it
yeah,
and still meet your goals,
yeah.
the better.
We are planning to come to council by the end of this year with a new fee structure basically for our building permits. How we do the permits, that's going to be very much based on energy efficiency.
Thanks so much for your input, everybody.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Have a good rest of your meeting.
It's in the preamble.
Okay.
Oh,
I'll just call a quick recess.
So that's.
Okay, we'll recommence the meeting here. Next we have development permit number 509 for 39668 Government Road, Squamish, with the applicant and the planner. So we'll have a staff presentation to start.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon, Advisory Design Panel. My name is Fletcher. I'm planner with the Community Planning Department here. Today I'm here to introduce an application for a mixed commercial residential building at 39668 Government Road. The proposed development is subject to review under Development Permit Area 3, the Universal Guidelines. This is a priority development application, which means that it's in the priority development review queue. This is because the applicant is proposing to build all of the residential units to 100% market rental, secured with a housing agreement. That means that this development will only be reviewed one time at Advisory Design Panel, and the recommendation at the rear of the report has been amended to reflect this. The proposed development is within the mixed-use district 1 zone, or the MUD 1 zone, and the report incorrectly states that there are 3 variances. There are only 2 variances to the zoning bylaw. The first is to the number of loading bays required. The zoning bylaw requires 3 loading bays, where the applicant is proposing 2. And the rear setback, 4-meter setback is required. The applicant is proposing a 0-meter setback. Staff are requesting that Advisory Design Panel give feedback and expertise specifically on 4 items. The first, the location of the loading area on the east side of the site that loads off of the Queensway Government Road 3-way intersection. So we're seeking ADP's expertise on the alignment and functionality. Staff are seeking feedback on the location of the indoor amenity space, which is located on the northwest corner. We're seeking ADP feedback regarding the usability of that space. Also seeking feedback on the transition to the adjacent properties and to the Government Road frontage. As you can see, the development is elevated to meet the construction level with the close parking. There are some bare concrete walls facing adjacent properties, and we're looking for ADP expertise on how to soften that transition. There are 4 development permit area guidelines that aren't being met that staff are seeking ADP expertise on as well. These are highlighted in the report in 36.9, 36.10, 36.11, and 36.12. And as always, staff are seeking ADP comments and recommendations regarding the form and character of the proposed development, including the site plan, architectural design, building materials, and exterior finish, and landscape plan. And I'll hand it over now to Richard.
Okay, I'm Tanis Schulte with THUJA Architecture Studio. I'm the architect for the North Yards Phase 2. This is Frank Linshu, Development Manager at West Urban, and Andrew Webb, Project Manager at West Urban. So this is Phase 2, a 38-unit building. So Phase 2 is highlighted green on the site plan here. Phase 1 already under construction on this piece of property here. Some context images, which are a little out of date now that construction began. So this is within the MUD 1 zone. And I think this one behind is the only other one that has an improved DP right now.
No, I think the one that's next to the tracks has it.
Oh, they do as well, okay, yeah. So the whole neighborhood is currently single family, or there's single family homes within the neighborhood, and this area is transitioning into the MUD 1 typology. So I have a little key plan here because we're 2 phases, it's 2 separate properties, but we're essentially looking at this as one development. So like I said, phase 1, currently under construction. And then phase 2, you can see on the site plan what we've done is we've sort of pushed the 2 buildings to the opposite sides of the property, and we've created this interior courtyard. It's elevated above Government Road, but it sort of gives this animated space. The first floor of both of the buildings is all commercial with large overhead doors, so people can grab a coffee and come out into this courtyard area. So the design of the second building is strongly informed by what's happening in the first building. So same heights. We have a shared access off of Government Road that's actually occurring on the first phase. So the vehicle access into the underground parkades happens over here to phase 1 and then here to phase 2. As Jesse mentioned, so phase 1 doesn't have a loading ramp up to the flood construction level. Loading happens below, there's loading right here, and then you would come in through the elevator. So on phase 2, we wanted to clean that up a little bit and provide exterior loading. So we have the access, which is an existing access right now, at the corner of well, I guess it would be the 4th stop at the 3-way stop sign right now. So you would come in, there's a turnaround and a loading stall here and a loading stall here, and then the users would either dolly or forklift up this ramp in the back and then come in behind, and then they can service each of the buildings through the load-up doors. So for access from Government Road, we have an accessible ramp on both projects coming up. This set of stairs that we have on phase 2 is a little more direct and less elaborate than phase 1. There's a bit more room on phase 1, so we've created sort of a gathering area that people could use when it's, in the summer. That's on the northern side, so it's shady. There's some bench seating and stuff, so we've not done as elaborate on this side. Sort of our rationale for the access there. Underground parking, garbage is served by, sorry, I'll just click back here, right here. So the garbage truck would come in behind, outside of, where the public would be, and then load in and out of the door there. So main floor plan is the commercial space. As Jesse noted, there's an indoor amenity requirement that we've put on the main floor plan, or on the main floor plate. So that would be, for the apartment users to come down. I'm not sure how we're activating that yet, but we've located the space there off of the main lobby. Office space on the second floor, and then sort of separate of that would be the residential units, and then the third and fourth floor plans would be solely apartment. Just some standard unit plans. So the sections show sort of the elevation above flood construction level, Government Road being down here, and then in essence the first level of parkade is above grade. So you would come in or up from Government into the first level of parkade, and then you would have to access the main level through the stairs or the accessible ramp, or inside through the elevator. For the look of the building, on North Yard's phase 1, we had a gable roof with some sheds flying off the front and back, and we wanted to simplify. We wanted to speak the same language in the phase 2, but we wanted to simplify the roof line and give it its own identity. We didn't want to do the same building twice, of course. It is a smaller lot as well. So similar with the roll-up doors facing the plaza. We have a deck out front that serves the office space, and then it's broken by the stairwell, and then the units on the lower floor would have larger deck space out front of their units, so that also helps animate this public realm. So we've used the same material palette throughout as North Yards. We've just alternated the colors around, and then on this project we've introduced quite a bit more of the wood look, and we're doing that sort of within these boxed out window areas, and then highlighting the main entry and breaking up the wall a bit at the stairwells. This would be the wall that Jesse is referring to on these two slides. So this is the rear wall that faces Greg Gardner's property behind us, and then this is the loading ramp up from Government Road that, as it goes up to meet the main floor level, obviously gets larger at the back. So maybe I'll just go to the rendering that shows it a bit better. So in the front, what we're looking at doing is planting it up, and Laura Lynn can speak to this a bit more in a sec. But we have planters located on the edges of the plaza, and then we would have a growing medium that sort of overflows to green up the wall. Same thing proposed in the back. And then on the ramp on this side here, it would be similar to what's happening at is it the Minstrel building? The one on Loggers Lane?
Yes.
So that it's sort of, the grade sort of slopes up, and then they have these really lovely ornamental grasses and trees. So we would be looking to screen the wall from the ground up on this side, and then from the planters, because we're zero lot line in the back, and then from the planters up here. So you can see here just a fairly simple staircase coming up from the road, although quite a bit wider to, invite people in from the street. We're sort of leaving phase one to be the gathering area on Government. I have a material board as well, if you guys are interested in looking at it. We're looking at introducing the Core 10 planters and columns, same as phase one, to sort of tie the two developments together. Similar color palette, and then on this phase we've introduced the wood look. The shadow study. This whole neighborhood, as I said, Mud 1 is changing. They're all, in essence, 5-story buildings, so it's going to be built up quite a bit. The second floor and the decks out front cantilever over the main floor, so each entry has weather protection. And Laura Lynn, are you ready to talk about your landscaping?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm on L1.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I couldn't be there in person. The landscaping is, as Kenneth said, trying to fit with the neighboring buildings so that they kind of read together as one. So we use very similar palette. Kenneth, did you have a plant photo board that I sent you?
I do, yep.
I don't know if any of you members were on the first one, but the plants are quite similar, lots of ferns in the shady side, some small pine, Gamugo pine, but more of an upright variety, the Pinus incinata. Some dogwoods out front, and then in the planters is lots of ornamental grasses, and across the back, same thing, some flowering perennials and ornamental grasses. And then along the far side where we've got some exposed parkade and the ramp, the loading ramp, I've got a line of a very narrow tree and the ginkgo tree, if there's a narrow fascigated version of the ginkgo, I think would work well in here, and then just green up the rest with the dogwoods and climbing plants. What did I put in there? I put the Virginia creeper, folia, and it can cover huge, massive areas quite well. So I think that'll help to green up that exposed parquet wall. Whether we have a little bit of a courtyard, if you recall, on the first building, and so these two buildings, this sits right in between them, so we obviously wanted to continue the courtyard over. The trick here is it's all on slab, so what they're going to do is butt the parquet slab of the new building tight up against the parquet slab of the first building, and our courtyard is going to span over top of these two. So we're using some raised planters with a kind of portent steel edge to give the growing medium enough depth, and then we'll be able to have a bit of trees. And I also am going to just firm up the growing medium, put a bit of lawn so it feels like you're not on slab, but underneath there is concrete. So we'll berm up enough that we can kind of put some small ornamental trees on there and some slabs of concrete and wood, kind of keep with the industrial sort of feel that's going with the building, and set those in amongst this bit of green space to give us a bit of a courtyard. I think that kind of sums it up. If anybody has any questions, let me know.
Okay, I think that's most of it.
Okay. All right, we'll start with some questions. We'll just go around clockwise here. Carlos? Sure.
Thanks for that presentation. I can see the site's quite challenging with having to put the ramps up on both buildings. Did you ever explore a shared access agreement for that ramp, or is it mandatory to have a ramp for each building? I'm sure it is, but.
The accessible ramps?
Yeah.
Um,
I know it starts to like mess with your loading bay and all that once you do that. This is quite a big area in front of the building that could be used.
I think the concern that we had is that it is a phased project, but the building could always sell in the future, or its use could change, right? So you don't want to not provide that access, right?
No, that's totally fair. I remember watching this when it first came through, and it's one of those, it's a comment, leave it for comment. What's the treatment at the top of the parquet? Is it just the concrete of the parquet? Is there any, is there a paver on top, or?
Yeah, so it steps down. So we'll have, it's like a granular fill for drainage, and then we'll have another concrete topping on top.
Right.
But it's not going to be like stamped or anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned there's some Core 10 planters
Yes.
in the plan.
Yeah.
Did you explore just weathering steel as opposed to Core 10 as material?
Well, they're sort of interchangeable,
Right, okay.
So
I thought Core 10 was Core 10 is a certain type of
it's like a name.
specific-
It is
a
weathering
brand.
steel,
Okay.
so we'll weather it
Right.
probably with a material or with a solution, and then
And then around the base of the Core 10 planter, the weathering steel planter, what the plan is?
so Laura Lynn has a detail actually that we're using. It's there's like a channel that's stepped away so that there's no bleeding basically onto the concrete, and that occurs at the planters and the columns as well.
Okay. Excellent. And then one more question. Sorry, go ahead.
I just was going to elaborate on that. So the concrete edger basically comes up to the edge of the planter, and then there's about a 1-inch gap, and then the planter edge itself, so as water drips down that might be stained, it won't stain the concrete, it'll go into this channel, and then we would fill the channel with a small 3/4-inch crushed rock, probably like a black basalt or something that you really wouldn't see. You wouldn't use like a white color in there, and so it would just be it would just kind of go into the rock, and then it goes down and there's drainage for the rest of the roof, green roof buildup that you've got underneath for all your soil and drainage, board and everything.
Okay.
And did you explore for some of the wood accents using real wood as opposed to the hardy?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of real wood, but these are market rentals, right? This isn't a condo, so we have to be really cognizant of the materials that we use for budget, basically.
Awesome. That's all my questions.
Okay.
Thank you, thanks for beautiful, very, very nice presentation, and I think it's a very good project, especially for rental. More than I expected, actually. It's wonderful. And basically, I think it's a good solution, site-wise and height-wise and general
Yeah.
massing.
If we can just stick to questions first, and then we'll do general comments after.
Basically, I don't have any basic question.
Mike?
I think I only have 2 questions. So, as far as the location of the indoor amenity space, you mentioned we're not sure how we're going to activate it. What is
I'm not sure if we're doing like a
Yeah, we just have
gym
to
or
set the
a-
program.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Not sure what is in that space.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then, so there's the property behind you guys. So one of the questions is how to like spruce up the back. I guess it's the
This one right here.
southeast wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a DP approved behind you. What's
Yeah.
facing that wall? Is there?
So, were you on panel for that?
I don't know.
Okay, so it's basically this really lovely garden area. There's a little bridge, I think, and some seating. Is that what they're still doing?
I believe it's still common open space.
Okay.
What's specific?
It's planted out. So we have access from North Yards 1. Do we have that shown here?
I think it's a combination of landscaping and a trail.
Yeah, so we have this trail on North Yards 1 that comes into that open space and with stairs down from the plaza into there as well. So this area is actually planted on North Yards 1. And then this, because this is 0 lot line, so we're just, basically it's a green area and we're just gonna try to green up this whole wall with landscape to tie into this, whatever area it is that you guys are calling it.
That was all I had.
Beautiful. Really love it for, especially for market value rentals. The indoor amenity space again, is that going to be just for the commercial level space, or is that for the residents as well?
It's for the residents.
Purely.
The requirement is for the residential units to have an indoor amenity.
I'm just thinking of access to them versus, I just don't see the access. Is it an elevator?
Yep, so
Oh, okay.
they would use the common lobby to
Yeah.
access. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And the other question is, on the second floor, there's a studio unit that seems to share an entrance with the office space?
No, it's notched out of that unit.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, sorry.
Sorry.
And are these all going to be accessible? Or a certain percentage of them accessible?
There are, the studios and the 1-bedrooms have an opportunity to be accessible, but that's something we can look at.
Yeah, we can discuss that.
Okay, and then my final question is, the concrete faces, you're asking about, I think Jesse was asking about how they're going to be treated. Are they going to be treated upon completion, or were you going to leave them bare and then go look for artists to completed, or we can cover it with greenery?
Our strategy is to cover it with greenery.
Okay.
We've talked about artwork. We're sort of the opinion that it ends up getting tagged and then.
That was my concern,
Yeah.
that it doesn't get tagged, so that it's dealt with immediately, so it doesn't get tagged?
Yeah.
So, hence my question.
Yeah, so as fast as that greenery can grow, but yeah, I think that it provides a lot, right? Like, if you have a whole green wall, we're talking about there's, bees and insects, and
Yeah.
it has a cooling effect.
Exactly.
And then there's no opportunity to sort of destroy that blank wall, which
Yeah,
is
you
just.
minimize that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello. I'm just looking, if you could speak more, you spoke about the loading bays, but if you could just speak a bit more about them. There's the loading bay that's between the two buildings, and then we have the long linear one at this building. Can you just kind of remind us why there's two and why we're kind of limited with the one between the two buildings?
Okay.
And why we need the long skinny one?
So this is for the first phase,
Okay.
which
so
are two separate properties, basically. So we had to meet the requirements on both properties.
Yeah, so that loading box down below where your cursor is only allowed to be used for phase one. Is that the case? And then,
That's the intent.
is there any capacity to expand that one so that the one in the east isn't required?
So we require two on that side as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we would, to serve this whole development is 4 loading bays.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's, they're big, right? It's a lot of space.
That's tricky. Yeah. Okay. And then just a small question regarding street trees. Is there a standard tree on this road, or is it really up to the design team to select what goes in?
There is no standard tree for this road at this time.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. That's all my questions.
Just staying on the loading bay there, the access to building 2 is that shared?
We're going to do a crossover agreement.
That's right.
Yeah. So into the parkade only.
So that's a covenant that's put on in perpetuity in favor of.
Yeah, so basically what it is, it's a legal document between the two properties that's registered on title that gives, allows for the ability for the vehicles to basically move from one property into the next for access purposes.
Okay. And was mechanism like that ever considered for loading bay solution situation? To allow access into a widened loading bay on the one that actually exists?
Sorry, I'm not really following you. So to have all the loading bays on one property?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, we didn't consider it.
If I may, the question is whether it's legally possible. I think it is.
Yeah.
With just a covenant.
I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. There's the fact, one, we bought both properties at different time frames. So phase 1 we acquired first, and then as luck would have it, after we've completed our planning, we managed to secure property number 2. I think the other thing too is, to widen the loading bay in that area and also accommodate traffic moving in and out, it could get a little congested there.
Yeah.
Versus having the separate bay that we've shown on the site.
Maybe a stat question for staff. Is the applicant required to do any traffic turning radiuses to show proof that a double WV20 can actually get in and out of this junction?
No, it's not a requirement. It hasn't been requested.
But on that point, we did have our traffic consultant take a look at that because we were concerned about the same issue.
Yeah.
So we do have a traffic study.
Okay. Do you have tenants for the commercial space at the moment?
At this point in time, no, we don't. We want to get through this phase to see what changes. And then once we get further along and we're fairly confident in what the plan's gonna end up, we'll start our marketing program for not only the commercial, but also for the residential as well.
Because the question is kind of in relation if it's going to be a save on foods, and it's probably not. But you know, if there's
No.
going to be like huge trucks there, or if it's going to be, it looks an undivided space. So
Yeah, so I'll just speak to that because we did the same on phase one. Because we don't know who the tenants would be, we've left it open so that we're not somehow encumbered by that. But the project's been designed, so you can kind of see there's like where the demising walls would go, right? There,
Mhm.
it's chopped up into about 6 units.
and then if the loading is now going to be separated into each individual lot, what is the main purpose of the walkway around the rear of the property that's causing this 0 setback
So-
request?
So we want, okay, so we have loading on both properties. What's happening on phase one is that they're loading in through the elevator, and it's just a standard elevator. So that could be quite awkward sharing with residential and trying to get a pallet of, I don't know, office supplies in there.
Yeah.
So we recognized that while we went through the design phase on that building, and we wanted to supplement the loading accessibility from this project because it is, it just allowed for that room on this site, whereas on phase one we had no room to get a ramp up to, you know, it's like 8.5 meters. It's
Yeah.
really long, right?
So you're foreseeing commercial use in building 1 potentially having their items delivered via building 2.
Yeah. Sorry, it's an option. They can still go through
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
A question about the siding are you using metal flashing around the edges of the hardy panel?
Yeah. So all the panels will be like an easy trim.
Are they going to be color matched, or are they going to be?
I don't think they'll be color matched.
No. Okay. Yep, that's all my questions. So one more question.
Yeah, the office space, I was just gonna ask about the commercial space, but you answered that question. Is the office space gonna also be divvied up, or is it just one, gonna be one unit to one, renter?
I don't think we're sure at this moment.
No, I think we've designed it so that it allows for that flexibility.
Okay.
So it just depends on the tenant and how much space they need. We can divide it up accordingly. You know, earlier in your conversation about the zoning, you know, the same principle applies here, where we're trying to keep it as flexible as possible.
And a question to Jesse, just a requirement for elevators. Is it a requirement that there only be one elevator? Because what if that elevator goes out of service or has to be used for moving? Does everybody else out of luck?
That's a great question. I don't have a great answer for. From the zoning bylaw perspective, we don't regulate elevators. I believe it would come down to the BC building code, which
Okay.
is outside of my expertise.
Just something to consider, especially when you're talking about accessibility and that, but still, if you're moving people up and down and one elevator goes out, that might be an issue. That's it.
Can you move it? Yeah.
One small question. If you want to divide the office thing, you need a corridor at the back, and because you have to have resting.
Yeah, we did it on the first phase. It's basically the same footprint, so we have to create exits out of each of those office spaces.
Right, so you have to. And the other, the access to the commercial space is overhead doors. You have 2 at the very corner of the south and one at the west. Don't you think it's better to move the one further to the east so we are not actually providing here this space?
Mm-hmm.
I looked at the elevation, it makes more sense to move it
Yeah.
so you can divide it, because these 2 actually don't serve any purpose next to each other.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Corner.
open the building up on
Yeah.
that corner because it does face down to where there's that open plaza below. Yeah.
Makes sense, but if you want to divide it to 6 different units, these two next to each other will not give you the possibility.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go for comments. Carlos, we'll go back.
Sure. Can you just go back to the site plan again and just, so I think you mentioned it was Greg Gardner's property to the south? So that green space that's proposed, is that at existing grade?
It's at existing grade, yes.
Right, so everyone's gonna kind of be stepping down, units will be stepping down into that green space, or like, is it meant to be public green space, or is it just part of the
There's a
development?
statutory right away, I believe, on the green space or part of it.
I think
So
it's
just-
just the trail,
just the
that
trail.
has such the right away.
Right, okay. So I would just say, in working with staff, maybe put some thought to that and the varying levels. Because that can create some challenges and really change the way the space is used. I think this is gonna be interesting commercial space when you guys go to market this, as I think any commercial space kind of above the street level though is. You may wanna look at, I know that locally in this market, smaller spaces are really attractive. And so double loading, you have a great opportunity to double load this building for commercial space, and so maybe they may not be the most, they don't have to, have huge windows or roll up doors or anything like that, but just have these small units. And I looked at the zoning, and artisan use is one of the appropriate uses in the area, so maybe those less desirable portions you can chop up and have those be studio space or something that kind of speaks to what the mud zone, I think, was originally about. And yeah, I think that's a great approach for the weathering steel or the Corten. Challenge is always graffiti. And if someone marks it up and you've got this beautiful piece of Corten, you have to like grind it down, and then you have a section that's non-weathering. And I would say that that's always the position when you speak to municipalities, but I encourage you to use it because I think it's beautiful. And if it just looks like raw steel, well, that's kind of what that whole zone's meant to feel like. It's meant to feel raw and industrial, so I would encourage you to use that. And to that, I'd say, I see that on your call-outs for the landscape, you've got the benches as wood or a wood product or a composite product. And I know that that's always the desire, is to have composite products because of graffiti and things like that, but I heartily recommend using wood if the district will allow it, so that it feels natural, and there's a lot of options that you can get that are easy to swap out. So that's my recommendation on that one. Yeah, and wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
I think it's a wonderful project, and don't have much of a comment. I think it's very good.
I don't have a ton of comments. I think it's a beautiful looking building. I guess that back wall facing the back property that we were talking about, just, I don't know a ton about plants, but I'm guessing it's not going to be green all year long, so maybe doing something with it so that when it's in the winter, it's not just this big blank gray wall. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know if you could stamp it or do something with it to give it some sort of texture or art or treatment or something like that. This can be a decent sized wall, but other than that, that's all I have.
Beautiful building, as I said before, it's, as a public art piece, it's very beautiful. Just the indoor amenity space, think about how people are going to use it, and the aesthetic of it, and include artists when you're designing that space. I like the idea about carving out any non-usable spaces for artists' use. And again, that back wall, include art as part of the green space, just kind of mesh the two, work with, so that as things die over the winter, there's still art there, so you won't get the tagging issue and you won't have this gray slab. That's it, thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. It's a really cool looking building, particularly knowing that it's all rental. It's really great to see what can be accomplished within those means. In the loading area on the frontage, I would recommend giving another layer of texture and patterning to really clearly define where is the pedestrian zone, like the true pedestrian zone in terms of how they're accessing that ramp. And then as a secondary layer, it'd be worth considering when there isn't loading happening, which is probably quite often, that space could read almost like an informal plaza, and you could see the kids after work might come in and, you know, play with the soccer ball or something. So some sort of surface treatment within the means of the project in that area, I think, would go a long way. With regards to the roofs, I think that the roof is really interesting in the imagery that you have of the adjacent building. They do seem to speak to each other and in a playful way. They're not matchy-matchy, but they're similar enough that it feels like it's creating a cool neighborhood character, so I definitely support that. With regards to the wall, perhaps I could have asked this in a question, but I wonder if board form finish might be an interesting approach where it would have a strong kind of feel of Squamish, but it would give it a really rich character, particularly on the frontage of Government Road where we have the ramp going up. It could add a really lovely texture, and while I appreciate the introduction of the vines, which I think would look really cool, and give it a really soft texture, you know, they might die, winter comes, so it'd be nice for that wall to, no matter what happens to the planting, to have a nice texture to it. So possibly board form might be within the means of the project or something similar. Planting. So in general, I find the trees to be quite small. The ones that are specified generally are quite small in their mature size. So I just recommend doing a once-over and seeing if there's opportunities to get some larger trees. In particular, Government Road, I would suggest a tree that has a lot more stature and size to it. The dogwood is quite a small specimen. The ginkgos along the side, while a beautiful tree, are very slow growing, so you're not going to see a lot from them for some time. So some consideration on that. With the shrub planting overall, I would encourage another look over just to ensure that there is some habitat opportunities for birds and pollinator species. I think there is a nice approach to the grasses having a really nice contrast to the building, but finding opportunities to embed some more planting that would encourage some of those, the birds and the bees, as they would say. And just a small note on the rendering along Government Road, there's some rings around the trees, on the street trees. So I don't know if that's just in the rendering or the intention, but I would always be of the mind to make sure that water can get to those trees and they're not being hindered by any sort of curbing or edging or anything like that. The plaza area there, the wood seat that's kind of embedded in, I think is a really nice move. So if possible, it'd be great to see if there's opportunities to fit a few more of those fixed seatings in. I could see some of those tables might come and go with season. So it'd be nice, if it's possible, to just have a few more of those long benches in there. And then just a small one with bike racks. There's 2 bike racks that are being suggested, and I would encourage consideration for the hoop rather than the long, it's called the rolling, the one that's doing this, and just the nature of bikes in Squamish, to not have the 2 points of contact can be quite challenging. So I would suggest having a series of those rings rather than mountain bikes don't like that very much. But overall, a really great project, and thanks for sharing.
Yeah, really detailed presentation. Just a couple of comments. I haven't seen much lighting other than a couple of things on the landscaping plan, but maybe there could be some lighting embedded in that large wall adjacent to the loading bay, just because that is the main accessible entrance, and something nice built into the rocks or something. I'd really encourage color match flashing on Hardy. Or at least really careful consideration of where the lines meet with windows, because a slightly busy facade can become a completely headache-inducing facade if the lines don't match up, maybe just for an architect, but whereas other people too. I really like that the amenity space has been placed next to the front door, and it's not been out. A lot of developers might just push that to the back of the less usable space, so I really commend that. The back wall, I think a 4-meter back wall is quite large, and I'm not 100% convinced about why the variance is there to allow it. I think it's possibly allowing for a really great number of parking spaces. I'm not 100% convinced about the bringing trolleys around the side. That being said, I know that it's parking is a big constraint, and I've been up against that before. So I wonder maybe to break up the massing of that wall, considering that there's going to be a park behind it. If there was stairs or there's a storage room below, maybe that could be utilized for the staircase that could come down. I think you've got that in phase 1, just so that people aren't, just to, if you're in an artisan shop at the back and you want to go down to the park, you're not going across 2 properties or going down a loading ramp or something. And then that could just, with the planting, I think it'll be a really good way to break up. Yeah, that's my comments. If there are no other comments, we only have one option, I believe. So I'll read out. Okay, we have a recommendation that the advisory design panel would like the applicant to resolve the following recommendations. I guess we have some discussion on which recommendations, and then we'll just vote for that. So would anyone have any particular recommendations to add?
Yeah, I would say that I completely acknowledge that the properties were purchased at 2 different times and you're at 2 completely different stages of development. But I would encourage wherever there's ability to be flexible with allowing for shared use, that the district and you work together on looking for those opportunities, because it'll make a much better project. And I think the lesson of the mud zone is you write that into the mud zone at the beginning, so that you take your grader of your FCLs and you make everything the same FCL, so you can share your parkade and do the rest of it, so you don't have these variations in heights, because we're dealing with a really complicated site there. And so well done for finding some ways to share the use, but that would be,
okay,
keep working on that, and as much as you can minimize the doubling of.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Any other recommendations in particular?
The back wall.
Yeah, for the applicant perhaps to work with staff to just look at some mitigating features for that wall, understanding that the wall's going to be there. It's just in light of the park, perhaps. Some landscaping comments.
Yep.
Work with staff for bike racks and the tree comments, I think we'll.
Yep, and surface treatment potentials and.
Okay. Can I put my color match flashing as a recommendation?
Yep.
Yes. It's power. Settle down, dude. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it.
I
Okay.
just have a question to Jesse. Did we answer all of your before?
I think so.
36.9 or?
Yeah, no, they, you definitely addressed them, yes.
Okay. Do we have to vote?
Yes.
Okay. Can I get a motion to, okay, seconded? Okay. Okay. So there's nothing referrals from here, so, okay, the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Great.
Guys.
Thank you very much.
Well done, Dave.
Yeah.
Sorry, you could move to adjourn.
Oh,
I'm
yeah, I was gonna say.
move to adjourn the meeting.